coming to the end of summer. Welcome. Happy to be with the people present here today and anyone connecting online. This is part of our weekly series of lectures that we do every Sunday, trying to bring to all of those who are interested and our members who come here some lessons around Spiritism, what it is and how it can help us understand and deal with a lot of the struggles we have in our lives. And today the topic is around physical and spiritual poverty. Sounds to be kind of a difficult topic, and there's a lot of different ways we can go with this, but we're going to be focused, as we usually do, on the basic books from Allan Kardec, in particular the Gospel according to Spiritism, where Kardec, through the assistance from the spirits, goes through and help us interpret the Gospel, the New Testament, the Bible, basically trying to not change the meaning of the Bible, but to try to explain it in more modern terms. Remember, modern terms for Allan Kardec, who was alive 160 years ago. But we'll see how much has changed and how much hasn't changed. But today's lecture is going to be essentially focused on chapter 7. I do encourage those who like to follow up and do their own research to take the Gospel according to Spiritism and read it. Look at it's a good book because you don't have to read it sequentially. You can take the topic that you like and focus on a chapter like we're going to be doing today. And it doesn't really matter if it's the first or the second or if you read it in any order. Focus on what you believe is going to be more relevant to your questions, your curiosity, or maybe some of the things that's happening in your lives today. So before we proceed, we'll start with, like we do every week, with a simple prayer. Just raising our thoughts to God, our Creator, He who made us possible, made us exist, and has given us all of the tools and all of the chances for us to continue in our progress, continue in our evolution towards our happiness and our perfection. We also thank Jesus Christ, who is the Master, who wrote and helped us understand the New Testament, the Gospel, and the lessons that it gives us for us to achieve what we were created in the first place. So welcome everyone. Please open your hearts and your minds to the lessons and to the words we're going to be studying today. And please do join us later for our question and answers if you have any more additional curiosities, and so be it. So, poverty. Yes, poverty is a word that we think we understand, right? Who is poor? Poor is people who don't have things, don't have money, don't have a house, don't have food to eat, they're hungry, they don't have a land, they don't have anything. Those are what we call miserably poor. And we know that this uneven distribution of wealth that has been kind of given by God to this earth is very uneven, right? Some people have too much, and some people have little or nothing. And so we understand the economical term of poverty. But sometimes we don't necessarily think through what it means to us, who, if we live here, where we live in Toronto, coming here to the TSS, you probably are not drastically poor. But the whole idea of being very poor threatens us. It's something that we live as we become adults, very, very much aware that a lot of what we'll be able to do to survive, to obtain things, to eat, to have a place of shelter, to pay for health care, all of these, we can't have them if we're poor, if we're really, really poor. So it influences us in the quest to what? To obtain material things. Because everything that I've been describing so far is the poverty in the material world. the things that we need to survive as material beings. And we can't ignore that, right? Because if we're sick, if we're hungry, if we don't have our basic needs, if we're out in the snow, in the cold, in the rain, all of this means that we have some very fundamental needs that are not being met. But if we're not in that group of total poverty, we're in a scale that goes up. And we are kind of shaped as we go from childhood to teenagers to adulthood. That says you have to find a way to support yourself, right? Some people are fortunate that their families could be very wealthy, so they have money coming in from the family. You have assistance to start life, to get you in a very good school. Most of us are what we call middle class, right? So it's not like we don't have anything, but it's not enough, right? We can't rely on our parents forever to be supporting us. So there's this kind of negotiation and tension of when and how is the right time to wean our children out of the home into their own lives, to follow their own desires, their own vision of what and who they want to be as they continue to grow up and move on, right? And in some cases, and we'll talk not too much about this, this starts to also influence the identity of who we think we are based on what we do. Right? So if I am an engineer, if I am a politician, if I am whatever, that starts to create an identity of who you are, but we're not our jobs. We're much bigger than our jobs. The jobs is something that we prepare, study, get ready to do, something that we do, but it's not who we are. But that fear of poverty, really, if you think about it, why do we do these things? Well, part of it is greed, but there's a basic fundamental fear of not having things, of not being able to pay your bills, not to be able to have a home, right? So that fear is a great impulse for us to collect material things, money in the bank, right? A better job, maybe a bigger house, or for comfort and whatever. And this is how we distance ourselves from poverty. Is that wrong? No, I can't say it's wrong. But at which point do you start thinking that this can't be the meaning of life either? Life is not about collecting material things. Life is about the relationships that we have. It's about how do we use our wealth, and no matter how big or small or big it is, to help others, right? Without charity, there's no salvation. That is the motto that Kardec always followed. And what is this trying to address as we start to think this way? Well, then we start going into the issue of spiritual poverty, moral poverty, right? So at what point does it matter? Well, in reality, it should always matter. In the Bible, there's the story of a poor lady that she gives a very small donation, but to her, it's like almost everything that she has available. She wants to help others, and she gives it. So is she poor? By any of our standards, yes, she is. Certainly much poorer than anyone else who was there around her. And certainly much poorer than anybody that was giving a similar donation than she was. So material poverty, physical poverty, yes, it is an economical matter, but it's also a mindset, right? Because this woman, she didn't think about poverty when she was giving the assistance. She was thinking that she's richer than the persons that she was helping. And it's always the case, right? We always have somebody that we know or that calls upon us that are certainly much poorer than we are. Even if you're low income in a country like Canada, if you compare this to some underdeveloped countries or developing countries, in those countries, they will not be considered poor. So it's all very relative of what we do. And even this notion of having assets and collecting money and having money in the bank. Remember that early days, before we have had money, everything was bartered. So you would exchange what you have with somebody who had something that you wanted, right? So if you had some animals, right, and you had a lamb, you could exchange the lamb for fruits, for vegetables, for clothing, for tools. So that's how it all started. If you didn't have any properties, you could exchange your services. So you could work on a property, and they could give you shelter, food, in exchange of your service. Obviously, this led to a lot of abuses in terms of servitude. And people basically became slaves, and they could never leave that cycle that they will continue to live the rest of their life working just to get food and shelter, which is not a good thing, right? It does not show progress. And in obviously in the Spirit's book, we talk a lot about the progress of individuals. And it's not just the progress of having more money, it's the progress of learning new things, evolving yourself intellectually, putting yourself in situations where you have to continue to improve your moral skills. If you're working from dawn to dusk in the fields, and then you go back to where you sleep and you have a small plate of food, you have a place to sleep, which is crowded, and then the next day you start all over, you don't have exposure to all of the different things that enriches us as human beings. You're slave not only economically, but socially in terms of your interactions. So all of this changed with the creation of money, coins, back in very early days. And now everything has changed again. We don't use coins really anymore. We don't hardly use any money. We use everything as electronically. And then suddenly we have a number on the screen that tells how much money we have. That money is used for us to pay for our basic needs and much more. Pay for our retirement, pay for our ability to help our children grow and be educated and get a job and so forth. But as I said, if you go back to what drove us originally, is to get ourselves out of that physical poverty, right? And over time, this has now been exaggerated. Greed has really become so much more predominant when it becomes the end in itself, when that was really not ever the real intent, right? The ability to use the resources that is given by God to us on this earth is to achieve our evolution, our survival first, because if we're not surviving, we're not living, we're not having those new lessons. And also to be able to help and spread the wealth as required across the board. Now, these are sometimes tagged as socialist, communist thinking and so forth. But in fact, it goes back to the gospel, where Jesus is very clear about what it means to be poor, to share what you have. The stories about the woman who gives the little she has for donation. These all are parables, excuse me, that are teaching us that you don't have to be guilty for owning things as long as you can feel good of how you're using those things. And that possessing those things and more is not what's driving you in the day-to-day decisions that you have, because then you're dealing excuse me, with selfishness. You want everything to yourself. You want to take away. And in some cases, we can enrich ourselves by creating something. But the reality is, more often than not, a lot of the wealth is creating by taking it away from others. So you're making everybody, a bunch of people, a little bit poorer, and you're becoming richer. And that becomes your only goal, is to see that number, that virtual number that you have on a screen today, getting bigger, bigger, and bigger. And then using this to buy bigger homes, bigger cars, bigger boats, right? And enjoy them as much as you need to. So Jesus comes to us to explain, or at least provide by example, what it means to understand the difference between a material poverty and a spiritual poverty. Because the more that we follow that path of greed, of selfishness, the farther away, or the more we're becoming spiritually poor. And guess what happens when your body dies in this life? How much of the physical wealth do we take with us? Nothing. So although you might be enjoying and abusing the money that you have earned, the wealth that you have accumulated in this life, imagine how small this life is compared with eternity. On the other hand, anything that you do to address the spiritual poverty, yes, it is something that you take with you. You take with you back to the spiritual world, and you take it with you for all your future lives. That is part of your moral progress, evolution. We've talked often about describing our evolution as wings of a dove, where one is the intellectual wing, the other one is the moral wing. You can't fly if one wing is much bigger than the other. So you have to continue evolving. And I think this message has been discussed, presented anytime in the Christian faith and even in other faiths, where the idea of charity, assistance, donations are very important. But Jesus is back. Well, he's here 2,000 and plus years ago, and he's trying to explain this to people who are living basically in a rural setting. You know, there are some cities are starting to become, but they're nothing like what we are today. Think of a small village in any country. Those are the kind of settings that you would have at the time. Everybody was working on the land, producing stuff, or becoming merchants, right? The merchant group was starting to become more participating and exchanging these merchandises and this money across the board. So he's trying to explain that. And unlike today, back then, especially in Galilee, in the Jerusalem area, there were a lot of really very simple folks that didn't have much. Either you were somebody who worked for your income, and they weren't paid a lot of money, right? They're not paid today a lot of money. Imagine back then they were paid even less. Or you were small farmers, trying to survive and trying to get better every day. And here is Jesus trying to explain to these folks the whole notion of what happens when we go back to the spiritual world, which in the language of the gospel is often called heaven, right? In some ways, the word heaven is not just the spiritual world, but it's more of the end state that we're evolving to within the spiritual world as we become more and more pure spirits, advanced. because a lot of things that they talk about in terms of the God's realm, we all go there regardless. Whatever, no matter what we do in this life, once our body dies, everybody goes back to the spiritual world. There is no distinction. And what Jesus is trying to explain is basically, as the spirits have kind of clarified for us, and we see this a lot in the gospel, is that those explanations of, who is entitled to go to heaven, they really were Jesus's way trying to explain that everybody needs to evolve to reach that heaven. And it's not going to happen when we discarnate the next time. It's a process that repeats itself over and over again, and we're getting closer. And he's trying to explain, what do we need to do to get further in the evolution faster? Because each one of these lives, even though we find many joys, there is a lot of suffering that we can have. Some of them are more intense or less intense. But at the end of the day, it is a life of trials, of learning. And when we learn, we make mistakes. And when we make mistakes, it can hurt. It can hurt us. It can hurt other people. So when this kind of Jesus starts to put this really in the context, it's probably on the most popular or famous or well-discussed part of the New Testament, which is the Sermon of the Mount, Matthew 5. It's my favorite, for sure. Because it's like the Coles Notes. In Canada, we have the Coles Notes. It's the summary of a lot of his teachings. In a few paragraphs, he summarizes all of the fundamental principles of what is needed to evolve, right? So in Matthew 5, verse 3, is the key one that we're going to be discussing now. Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. So here's the word poor. We've been talking about material poverty. We've been talking about spiritual poverty. And now there is the poor in spirit. What do you think Jesus was referring to? And this has been subject to a lot of discussions, right? Because at the time, and even when some of these translations of the Bible were being done to English, poor spirit could reference people who are simple-minded, or not very smart, not very educated. Maybe they have some learning challenges. Those were the simple, poor in spirit. But obviously, that's not what Jesus was talking about. And here, we don't know if these were the exact words he used. Because remember, these Gospels, they were written many years after Jesus died. And none of these people were actually witnesses to these events. So this was all passed word of mouth. I don't know about you guys. I do a lot of meeting professionally. We finish a meeting. We want to discuss, to create the minutes of the meetings. And within 2 hours, we can't agree what was said in the meeting 2 hours before. Right? Everybody has a little different description. And we're trying to, what were the words he said? And it's challenging. And that's why with the virtual, what we had to do is just record all of the virtual meetings, because now we have the recording of what was actually said. And then we correct a lot of people, because what we hear is not necessarily what's being said. Now, the meaning of what Jesus said was clear, right? It was the same, but maybe the words he was using in the translation for the Aramaic, or I don't know if he would be speaking Hebrew to well, but it's more likely he was speaking Aramaic. It doesn't necessarily translate to good words in English. But regardless, what this kingdom of heaven, right? What is the kingdom of heaven? Is it the spiritual world? Right? It says, the blessed of the poor in spirits, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Well, to me, the kingdom of heaven is the spiritual world, but as we strive to evolve to much higher levels of purity, that is the kingdom of what we're calling heaven. So he's saying, blessed are the poor in spirit. And what he's saying here is more about the meekness of the people. There's also, the meek will inherit the kingdom of heaven as well, right? Because what they're saying is that in many ways, we have to resist another difficult vice that we have. We talked about greed, right? So greed and selfishness is definitely vices that we have that stop us from moving faster forward. The other one, which is huge, and all of us have to deal with this, is pride. So what the spirits are telling us here is the same. By poor spirit, Jesus does not mean persons devoid of intelligence, but the humble. This is now we're going to be contrasting humble versus proud, right? So they're saying that the kingdom of heaven is about the humble, not the proud. So if we just fit that back in that one sentence, it says, to reach the higher levels of the kingdom of heaven, you need to improve your humbleness. For that's the path for you to continue evolving. As long as you're stuck with your pride, as long as you perceive yourself at a level of superiority to others, and sometimes superior to God, you're not going to be making a lot of headway, guys. You're going to be kind of slowing down your evolution. So, poor in spirit is meek, it's humble, is accepting that we're, first of all equal, all created by God equally, that we're all in the same journey of evolution, that we all make mistakes, that we're all very imperfect, and that it is through accepting our limitations, accepting that we do not control completely our destiny. That's the first step for you to be then merged into this whole kind of direction that the universe is leading us to. So he continues to say, persons of knowledge of intellect usually have such a high opinion of themselves and their superiority that they consider divine things unworthy of their attention. Their gaze focused on themselves cannot leave itself up to God. So if we're the type of people who believe that everything that we have achieved was done because we're so good, we're smarter than everybody else, we're special, like that we did the extra work when others were not doing the extra work, and that we were essentially building our own future by ourselves, you're on the wrong path. Because part of us growing up, and we have some young folks here, is to understand and accept that in fact we have very limited control of what's going to happen to us. For those who are a little bit older, think about how you got here. What was the path that led you from the place you were born all the way to be here today in Toronto, or this state, listening to this guy talk? And think about how much of this was just life happening around you, opportunities showing up that you didn't expect, that made you then come to different paths, not a straight line. There is no straight line for any of you. It wasn't for me, for sure. It had been very up and down, left and right. So who's I don't want to say fault, but who was really leading us to be here right now? And how your life is, and what you have, your family, your children, your properties, whatever. Who made all of this? Well, it wasn't you. It wasn't certainly me at all, right? We depended a lot on other people. that had little or even sometimes major influence that allows us to be here. So, very simple one. We're all immigrants here. This happened that I don't think there's a, well, the kids might be Canadian born, I'm not sure, but I think everyone here is an immigrant. The only reason we're here, one of the reasons we're here, is because somebody in the Canadian government over the years decided they're going to accept immigrants. They had not made that decision, we wouldn't be here. How many more of these things that happen that was outside our control? Millions. And who's controlling this? Is it just random? Is it we're just lucky to be here? In some ways, maybe there's a bit of luck, if you can put this, but ultimately, everyone's life is connected. Everyone's life is connected to those who are alive today, or connected to the decisions that were made before. We can't separate ourselves from one another. And who drives what's happening across this monumental number of people, billions of people that are living today, plus all the billion of spirits that have incarnated and reincarnated over the years? But this is part of the major plan that God has created. So when you say that God is driving our lives, right? If you reconcile this with the notion of free choice, how can we have free choice if God is driving, right? If all the decision is made by God, we don't have a lot to say. Now, neither of them are absolute truths. We do not have complete ability to make our own decisions, and God is not making us make those decisions. So our decisions can change our path. What God does is create all of these different parameters, all of these different people, different decisions, right, that continue to support the evolution of these spirits, hopefully at the same time. So we're trying to evolve ourselves as much as possible together. So being poor of spirit begins with understanding that. Being humble that we're not here just because I'm special. God does not create different spirits. You're special, you're not special. What's happening here today with us is the sum of all of our existences, all of our actions, all of the things we did right, and all of the mistakes we made. But not just us. I'm partially here because of all what you spirits here did in your past lives as well. Because somehow it has added up to where the world is. Does this diminish then our responsibilities for our decisions? No, on the contrary. You know, the old saying, if life gives you lemon, make lemonade. That's what's God telling us. The lemons are the things that either we've created or has just happened to be created by other people, other spirits. These are the lemons, and we have to make the best lemonade that we can do. But if you don't understand that, you cannot believe in God. You cannot accept God's kind of power over us. You can't be humble. You can't evolve. Now, humble, it's not perfection, right? So we have to measure ourselves. And I know that this is a struggle that I have, right? Because remember, physical poverty creates a fear, it creates us a drive. It gives us drives for us to be successful, correct? Succeed in whatever scale you think is appropriate for you, right? To get a good job, to get a raise, right? To make good use of the money, invest. So all of these are things that you're doing, and we can't help but be proud of what we've done. And pride is a word that I often struggle with because In some ways, we're taught to be proud. By being proud of what we're doing provides the drive for us to continue to do more. Right? If we're not proud of our family, if we're not proud of our job, if we're not proud of the decisions I've made, then you're not giving yourself the tap in the back that you're doing well. But at the same time, if that becomes the reason why you do things, then your decision making from that point on becomes skewed, becomes kind of pointed in the wrong direction. Because then it's all about your ego. It's no longer about kind of the satisfaction of continue to do what we're trying to be better every day, to be a little bit better today than we were yesterday, whether it's in the physical respect or on the spiritual matters. So one thing is, can we recognize and reinforce the good things that we're doing without falling in the trap of blind pride, of narcissism, of thinking ourselves at that point, what is your kind of major assumption? I'm really good. I'm really better than you guys because I have more money than you. I have a bigger house. I have a better car. I have a great job. My kids are going to the best schools and they have a job at a bank and they're doing great. That becomes the worst type of pride that you have. Because now you're lifting yourself above your brothers and sisters. And this is what Jesus is telling here. Because at this point, you're no longer poor in spirit. You are now a spirit who is disregarding others, putting yourself first all the time, making decisions that benefit you, even and very often, if it is in the detriment of others. In this chapter, and I'm still in item number 2 of the chapter, so this is a good thing of why we do these. We have study groups, right? And we go through these books page by page, because so much can be taken and try to put, and again, to bring it big more into the perspective of today, or real lives. Because yes, we want to know what was said 2,000 years ago, but what does it matter to us? How can we be humble? How can we be humble without being subservient and just saying, okay, God decides everything, I'll just wait for God to tell me what's next? That's not what God is asking of you. Right? God helps those who help themselves. You heard that before, right? This is true. God is giving you the tools, giving you the plans, it's giving you ideas, it's giving you helpers all along. But nothing happens unless you make decision to make it happen. But once it happens, don't take it as a sign that you're special. So he goes to say that Jesus means that no one is admitted into the kingdom of happiness, kingdom of heaven, without simplicity of heart and humility of spirit. In every instance, Jesus places humility in the category of virtues that brings us closer to God, and pride among the vices that distance us from God. So that's the difficult news, but that's what we have to work for. Kind of the good news is that, if you don't achieve it in this life, it doesn't mean you go to hell and stay there forever. That's not what we believe. But there are consequences, for sure. There are consequences for you to, every time that you move away from God, if you're distancing yourself from God, and we've had other lectures on this, to be closer to God means to follow the divine rules, divine laws. To distance yourself from God is when you don't follow those laws. It's as simple as that. And the laws of, treat others as they would like to treat you, right? That is a very important law that Jesus taught us. So when we're not doing that, we're distancing ourselves from God. When we do it, we're getting closer. So it's all like a very long tango, 2 steps forward, 1 step back, and you're hoping that you're continuing to progress, that you're not falling behind or being stagnated. In every instance, Jesus places, oh no, I said that, okay. He also talks about who will sit next to him or to God, to his right side and to his left side. And there's a couple of stories here. So the first example that he had is when he compares the good news, or the good kind of approach, to acting like a child. So in Matthew 18, he states that at the time, the disciples approached Jesus and asked, "Who is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven?" Jesus, having calling a child, set him in their midst and said to them, "Verily I say to you, that if you do not convert, if you do not become like a child, you will not enter the kingdom of heaven." How can we become a child? That means we're going to unlearn everything that we've done, and we're going to be playing with toys and not having any responsibilities. Is this what he's saying this? No. He continues, "Everyone who humbles himself becomes small like this child, will be the greatest in the kingdom of heaven. And as I stated, everyone who receives a child in my name receives me likewise." So humbles like a child. A child has no sense of greatness, especially small children. Today, when you get to be a teenager, that's a different story. But a child, 4 or 5 year old child, they act on kind of a pure intentions often, right? And they are not putting other people down. They can be a little bit selfish with their toys and things like that, but ultimately, they don't have this sense of grandeur that they are better than the other children. They are humble. And this is what he's, again, this message will be repeated over and over in this chapter. So I do encourage you to read it. And then he talks about another way that humbleness works. If you're not humble, you think you're the boss, right? You commend people, you hire people, you have money, they become your servants, your employees. You're in control. You're the boss. If you're the servant, and you're a good servant, you tend to be more humble. You're appreciative that hopefully he's getting a minimum good salary. So he's grateful that he has a job. He's grateful that he's doing what he's been asked, and that he's using that money to feed his family, right? But he doesn't think himself to be better, bigger, more important than his boss, right? And Jesus tells us this in even a bigger context of who will sit in the right side of God. And again, this goes back to 2,000 years ago. So often the king would have would sit down, and the people who are more important would sit closest to the king. And everyone else would sit back farther away, right? So your measure of importance is how close you're sitting next to the king. And I can tell you that even today, I go to very high-level meetings with ministers or even princes in the Middle East, and they're still treated this way. There's a strict protocol of how you're going to sit and how far away from the person sitting in the center will be. And this is a fundamental rule that can't be broken. So we still have these same ideas that, I want to be, my reflection of being important is by sitting next to Jesus or to God, either the right side or the left side. It doesn't really matter. It's just, if you're next, you're number 2, right? And then, but Jesus says, that the princes of the nations rule over them, and that they mighty treat them with authority. It shall not be the same among you. This is not about heaven. But let him who wants to become the greatest, so the ones sitting next, to Jesus or to God? Be your servant. And let him who wants to be the first among you be your slave, just as the Son of Man has not come to be served, but to serve and to give his life in redemption of many. Matthew 20. So this is a fundamental message. Even Jesus, we often say, what would Jesus do? And we know exactly what Jesus did. He didn't come here and says, I am the Son of God. By the way, people bring me food, treat me like royalty, come and glorify me, feed my ego, make me feel great because I'm the Son of God. He didn't do that, did he? He came here to says, I am the Son of God. So he's sitting next to God. But my job here is to serve you. Even to sacrifice this life for you. That is the example that Jesus gives us. More than anything, more than the words, Jesus taught us by example. And this is something that we Spiritists take very much at heart. I really don't care what another Spiritist is saying. Sorry. I do care what they're doing. Because if their words don't match their actions, then the words are not true. They think they want to say it. They think it's the right thing to say those words. They will make, again, this goes back to their ego. I am so good, I will say these things. We should be doing this, you should do this. But then I do something completely different. Now, that kind of hypocrisy, we're all guilty of. Because we're imperfect. So I'm not standing here saying that I don't do this. On the contrary, we're imperfect. We're not different. But what I'm saying is that don't fool yourself. Right? Be aware of what you need to improve. And that's really what life is about. If you think in terms of the cycle of reincarnations. Why did God create this? God gives us multiple chances to be in different conditions, in different scenarios, under different states. So what's the point of you being so rich, a billionaire this life? You know what? If you don't make use of that kind of condition, guess what you're going to come back with next life? Someone who's not going to be a billionaire. Someone who actually could be fairly poor or be bankrupt. Right? Because you have to learn what? Humbleness. We've heard stories of spirits. Look a lot of the literature of Chico Xavier that come in one life, they're beautiful. Everybody admires them. Their ego is filled with glories of how beautiful and wonderful and great they are. Next life, they're far from it. They're the opposite. Why? Teach them humbleness. That is to be, this is what Jesus was talking about, of being poor of spirit. Right? Is understanding that we're all in this together. We all have different defects or different errors that we make. None of us are even close, not even distant from any level of perfection. And if you focus on any thoughts of superiority, you're actually doing the opposite. You're proving that you're inferior, that you haven't learned your lessons yet. Well, thank you very much. That's what I wanted to bring about in this topic. I took it a little bit of different ways. I do encourage you to read chapter 7, either Portuguese or English, whatever language is more comfortable with you, and think about it. Think about, am I humble? Am I poor of spirit? Am I being a servant, or am I being arrogant, narcissistic, and selfish? There's not going to be a single answer to that, by the way. Well, if you have a single answer, we're always What I just said, all of us are. We're selfish, we're narcissistic, and we're certainly too much pride in our lives. But we're different levels, right? And at different points in life and different people, you have different answers to that question. But focus in, okay, if I did something or said something, and looking back, it says, wow, that was really, really arrogant of me. Why did I say it? Why did I try to put somebody down? Because when you do this, it is all about you feeling superior to them. Did I have to do that? Why did I feel good at the moment for doing this to another brother and sister of mine, another spirit? Why am I so poor that I need those things to make me feel good? Because at the end of the day, we do these things exactly because we think it's making us feel good. But then at the late at night, when you're alone, when you're with your own thoughts and you don't have to show yourself to nobody else, it's just you and your thoughts to God. Why? Ask yourself why. And think of how you could have handled that situation differently. And hopefully you will remember this the next time something like this happens. Thank you very much. Any questions from the internet?
There are a couple of comments, right?
Yes.
Do you want to read them?
Bom dia amigos. Excelente live. Good morning.
Thank you. We have Davi helping us today. He is a new addition to our team, so we welcome him. And anybody who's online as well, I do encourage read the gospel. Yes.
There is one more. He's shy to read in Portuguese.
That's fine.
Bom dia. As grandes provas, quais sempre são indício de fim, de sofrimento e de aperfeiçoamento do espírito. Comentado pelo Tarcísio.
Yeah, so the comment in Portuguese, I'll translate to English, is that the great trials are coming to the conclusion of something that we have to deal with, something that's an issue that we have, a trial that we have to complete. And it is very true. It's very true. And our track record that we probably fail more often than we succeed on those. Because we might try to think that we have learned our lesson only to, at a later date, could be the very next day, or it could be months or years later, we fall in the same trap. Right? We fall in the same arrogance, we fall in the same lack of humbleness. So be humble in a sense that one good thing about kind of tips. First step of being humble is to be a good listener. If you're not listening, you're not humble, right? If you're just talking all the time, you're being the opposite of humble. You're being proud. Mansplaining is the term that a lot of the ladies like to use when we're trying to explain everything to them. That's not being humble. That's being kind of imposing our ideas into others. Sharing ideas is fine, but listen as much as you can, because by listening, first of all, you learn. If you think you can't learn from others, that's arrogance right there. If you listen, you may only get one little thing that you learn, but that's precious, right? And if you think you have something to teach the others, do it with kindness. Do it with humbleness. Not trying to impose, but at least explain how you think, how you feel. Not telling them that this is the way that you have to do it. So be charitable in the way that you talk to others. That's also a good sign of humbleness. So those two things, it's a great start. And we learn to really accept the fact that even sometimes the simplest people have incredible nuggets of wisdom. because they see things from a different perspective than we do. I was telling here about the meetings that we can't agree on the minutes and what's being said. That's true about life. Someone who is in a different social position or financial, economical status, or have a different background, different education, whatever, that sometimes you might say that person doesn't know what they're talking about. How do we know that they don't know? Listen to them, give them feedback, talk to them, be kind, be gentle, be respectful. And then I think that's at least what I try to do. And not to say that I'm always successful in that, but keep trying. That's all we can do. I hope that you all can learn from that, and that will make you happier. That I can assure you, because it makes me happier when I can realize this, and I can try to correct my attitude, how I talk to people. Any other questions from here, from the group? Any comments? Well, thank you very much. As we close the prayer again, so much thanks to our Creator, to the spirits that help this house, and help us. Like I said, we need help. We need help for a lot of things. And let's be open and accepting this help. We know that we will make mistakes. God will be merciful to us, but we have to do our part. So we pray that God continues to give us an open heart, a clear mind, and the poverty of spirit to be humble and happy. So be it. Maybe you can close the streaming.